There are places on the map that are not marked with the red flags of tourist routes, but they are the real treasure. Unique archaeological discoveries in Khotylevo are of global significance for science. Near Bryansk, evidence has been found of the existence of art among Neanderthals. We found the most sensational discovery of all time there. In 200 years of studying Neanderthals, this is the only find of its kind. By studying those who came before us, we suddenly begin to understand something very important about ourselves. We are changing the world around us much faster than we could biologically change through natural selection. And we must change ourselves, and perhaps the world around us. Now we no longer have tens of thousands of years. Civilization is too dynamic, and there is no guarantee that we will not die out. But if we change ourselves, we have a chance. Russia Speaks is a project of the Key National Center Russia, a key venue for our country, created so that we can take pride in the past, value the present, and build the future together. Today our guest is someone who can talk about this in a way that gives you goosebumps. An anthropologist, a science communicator, a person who returns to Khotylevo every year because he's certain that this place has not yet revealed even a fraction of its secrets. Stanislav Drobyshevsky. My name is Angelika Kiryan. It's time to talk. Hello, Stanislav Vladimirovich. I'm very glad to welcome you to the studio of the Russia Speaks podcast. Thank you for coming. Hello, very glad to be here. Let's begin. I would like to get straight to the point. We are sitting here in the studio, and just a couple of 100 kilometers away, there is something like a time machine literally buried under our feet. I'm talking about Khotylevo. What makes this place truly unique, especially for science? In fact, there are unique places in our country in almost every ravine. The question is whether archaeologists have reached them. And they have reached Khotylevo. Incidentally, this is the result of systematic work in education. There was, and still is, the village of Khotylevo. There is a school there, and schoolchildren studied in it. A history teacher told them about ancient people who made stone tools. The schoolchildren, being resourceful, went down to the riverbank. Everything was right there on the bank of the Desna River, and brought back those very stone tools. The teacher called the Bryansk Regional Museum, and Fyodor Mikhailovich Zvernaev came from there. He spent 10 years excavating one side, then 10 years excavating another, and then another 10 years writing books about it. And now we, as Zvernaev's successors, and many archaeologists have worked there since, continue the excavations. In fact, within what is essentially a small village, all historical periods are represented, starting from 90,000 years ago. Ideally, we would like to have even earlier ones, but from 90,000 years ago onwards, everything is there. Neanderthals, including early Neanderthals, Cro-Magnons from what is known as Khotylevo II, dating to about 23,000 years ago, the Mesolithic, the Neolithic, the Bronze Age, the early Iron Age, the so-called Kiev culture, and the Middle Ages, including the early pre-Mongol period. Last year we even found a whistle that actually works, and everyone happily started whistling on it, which is not really appropriate. You're not supposed to whistle on archaeological, but how can you resist? It whistles. And there are also post-Mongol layers. And right above all this stands the school, where we now have our base and continue the excavations. Everyone has left their mark, quite literally. So we are also creating our own cultural layer on top of everything. This place is remarkable because on a single stratigraphic section, essentially an underground cross-section, you can see all periods spanning 90,000 years. In some parts of the Desna riverbank, all the layers have been preserved without disturbance. This is extremely rare for 90,000 years of deposits to accumulate without being destroyed even once. Earlier layers are disturbed. There were washouts and erosion, and no one knows exactly what happened there. But here, everything has been preserved. Such places are very rare, because usually water comes and goes, deposits, and washes things away, something collapses, something shifts. But here, everything remained intact. It is simply a very fortunate location. What is especially important is that it has been found and is being studied. In many places, such sites exist, but have not been discovered. In others, they are known, but not studied, because they are inaccessible. Somewhere in Yakutia, for example, they lie under permafrost. They may even be known, but getting there and getting back is extremely difficult. difficult. In Khotylevo, however, it is close to the city, accessible, and we have a base there. Thanks to patrons, it is our base, which is excellent. This is also an example of citizen science, when people step in and say, we will help organize this. As you can imagine, scientists do not have abundant funding. There is a state support, of course, but it is clearly insufficient for projects of this scale. Here we have several expeditions, one from the Institute for the History of Material Culture in St. Petersburg, which excavates Neanderthal sites, one from the Moscow Institute of Archaeology, which works on Khotylevo II and Cro-Magnons. And Bryansk archaeologists also carry out excavations. Nearby there is also the Tanishev's estate. Bryansk historians are working there as well, trying to restore it. It is heavily overgrown with hogweed, but they are bringing it back to life. There is a vast amount to see there. In general, the Bryansk region is remarkable. It has everything. There are many other sites, not far away. We take visitors on excursions. There is, for example, the village of Yudinovo, where one of the two proper museums with mammoth bone dwellings is located. One is in Kostenki in the Voronezh region, and the other is here in the Bryansk region. Few people know about it, but there are 4 dwellings there. Nothing like this exists anywhere else in the world. You mentioned layers, and Khotylevo is often compared to a kind of library, where each layer is like a chapter of a book. If we asked you to choose which layer, which chapter is the most fascinating for you, maybe not just for you, but for science overall. For me, the most exciting one is around 80,000 years ago. This layer is not the oldest, it sits a bit above the lowest one. But 3 or 4 years ago, somewhere around then, we found the most mind-blowing thing ever. A Neanderthal scribble. I even have it here on my t-shirt. There it is. I get that it might not look that impressive. You can zoom in. Yeah, it is not like I dressed up for this. It just happens to be the t-shirt. So, it is a small bone, about this size, which Neanderthals carefully smoothed. That is important. They clearly did it on purpose. And then they scratched this pattern onto it, a zigzag, like curved marks, short lines, longer lines. Why they did it is not obvious. But then they deliberately broke it. That is also important. It was broken from 4 sides, and then they placed their camp on top of it. So this is definitely not random. You cannot get something like this by accident. It takes serious effort. We even ran experiments. Our strongest archaeologists could not scratch bone like that, but the Neanderthals did, and in one single motion. Not lots of movements, just one. And this is art. In general, Neanderthals were not really into art at all. Over roughly 100,000 years of their existence, and even more if you count their ancestors, there are only a handful of examples, and most of them are much weaker. But this Bryansk scribble is the coolest one of all. The others are usually just a cross, some kind of zigzag, not even as neat as ours, sometimes just a couple of lines or simple parallel notches. Usually it is just a bone with random scratches, and it is unclear whether it is art or just the result of cutting leather straps or scraping meat. But in our case, it is clearly an image of something. What exactly? That is the question. To me, it looks like mammoth with tusks. Others see a bison, a rhinoceros, or even a tree. It depends how you turn it. We'll never know what the Neanderthals had in mind. But that's not the point. What matters is that they could do it, and it is important that in 200 years of studying Neanderthals, this is the only find like this. So thousands of Neanderthal sites have already been excavated. There are huge numbers of layers, finds, hundreds of thousands of tools, and just one such thing. This means they had the brains for it, but not the need. In contrast, at Khotylevo II, that is Cro-Magnons, 23,000 years ago, there are about 10 solid examples, 5 of them truly outstanding, and around 10 fragments of human figurines. These are already Cro-Magnons, already sapiens, and these are the Upper Paleolithic Venuses. For reference, there are about 200 of them known worldwide, and we have 5 really good ones. So that is quite a significant share, around 5%, roughly speaking. Cro-Magnons could do it, wanted to do it, and had a reason to do it. Why? Because Neanderthals lived in very small groups, about 20 to 25 individuals as estimated from site sizes and other data. And they simply did not need to create anything. From birth to death, you see the same 20 people. Everyone knows everything about everyone else. Neighbors are either relatives or enemies. Enemies you kill and eat. Cannibalism was common. And within their own groups, close inbreeding was frequent. In such conditions, art has no real purpose. Cro-Magnons, as we know from paleogenetics, tended to form unions with people from as far away as possible. They originated in Africa, where the environment was rich and population density was high. Hostile relations became disadvantageous in such conditions. You may win once or twice, but the third time you will be killed. It is more effective to negotiate and exchange information. And they brought this model from Africa to Europe. And at Khotylevo too, with these figurines, we can see it clearly. They made them to show people who were not very familiar with them that they were capable, that they were worth engaging with. Imagine I'm covered with beads made of shells or something like that. I collected them somewhere, and that means I am someone of value. You can talk to me, negotiate with me, not kill me. Worthy. Yeah, a respectable person. And what matters is that they prepared this in advance. They would make it pendant, so that if they met a stranger somewhere in the forest, in the steppe, they could present themselves. They invested time and effort in it in advance, anticipating that it might matter later. A strategy. It is a strategy. Whether they were fully aware of it is another question, of course, but in practice they did it, and this is what distinguishes us from Neanderthals. Neanderthals could do it, but they did not need it and didn't want it. But still, there is that scribble. One, just one, over 200,000 years. Though I even suspect why it appears in Khotylevo. Because Khotylevo is a place where there was a lot of flint, and still is. It is literally lying on the banks of the Desna River. They came there to make tools, and apparently, different Neanderthals came there from different places, not very familiar with each other. And that is when the need for art arose, and that is exactly where we find it. But if they stayed somewhere in a cave for 100,000 years, not literally in one cave, of course, but moving within a limited area, and saw neighbors perhaps once in a lifetime, then there was no need. And that is why we do not see art anywhere else. This is an important lesson for us. Selfishness and isolation may be beneficial in the short term, but in the long term, they are disadvantageous. Communication, exchange of knowledge, and even genes, because interbreeding also took place, are advantageous over longer periods. That is why we are here. Sapiens, not Neanderthals. And we carry about 2% Neanderthal DNA. And we did learn from Neanderthals, by the way. We borrowed clothing from them, for instance, and some types of tools. But Neanderthals didn't adopt anything from us. What could these newcomers from Africa teach them? What did they know about reindeer? For 100,000 years, Neanderthals hunted reindeer successfully. But when Cro-Magnons arrived, who simply used resources more efficiently because they had more knowledge and shared it, the situation changed. Where Neanderthal groups remained at around 20 individuals, Cro-Magnon groups grew with each generation, 22, 25, 50. I already mentioned that Neanderthal sites average about 25 individuals, while Cro-Magnon sites average about 50, twice as many. And if Cro-Magnons accepted Neanderthals into their groups, while Neanderthals did not accept Cro-Magnons, seeing them as not quite human, then the outcome becomes obvious. After a few thousand years of such interaction, Cro-Magnons remained, and Neanderthals disappeared. That is the lesson for us. I am curious, this is a very simple, almost naive question, if Neanderthals did not take in Cro-Magnons, but Cro-Magnons did take in Neanderthals, then on what basis could a Neanderthal join a Cro-Magnon group? Why would they need that? There could have been countless specific situations, because, as you understand, this went on for at least 5,000 years. If we count back 5,000 years from today, that takes us to the early Bronze Age, the time of the Sumerians, for example. So it is a huge stretch of time, and all kinds of situations were possible. A lost child, for instance, or a woman they might have taken in, or who joined voluntarily. Life among Neanderthals was rather bleak and monotonous, while Cro-Magnons were lively, wearing shells, simply more appealing. Neanderthals were not stupid. I want to stress that. They were definitely not stupid. Their brains worked perfectly well. They had about 1.5 kilograms of brain mass, more than we do. I have around 1.2, and they had about 1.5, so they could see the advantages, but the group decides. If it is a Neanderthal group, there will always be someone who says, "No, we were fine as we were. Outsiders have come in. They bark like dogs. Why do we need this?" But if it is a Cro-Magnon group, including one Neanderthal, why not? Both men and women, most likely. Clothing, for example, is more of a female domain, and we borrowed that from them. At the same time, we adopted certain types of tools, such as leaf-shaped points similar to the Mikokuyen. And in Khotylevo, by the way, the Mikokuyen is present. Later, in some Cro-Magnon cultures, for example the Cilician culture, we see the same types of points. That would be more of a male domain. So apparently both men and women were taken into Cro-Magnon groups. Since we have started talking about men and women, you have an interesting idea about Anthropoaesthetics. I will quote it directly. Men tend to find attractive what already exists, while women look for something rare. So, as we understand it, women are the ones driving evolution. Does this mean that the way we look today is, in a sense, a long-term project, shaped by what women have found attractive over thousands of years? Broadly speaking, yes, that is true. It is not my idea. That's what science says. I've never personally worked in Anthropoaesthetics, but there are anthropologists who do, and there are books on the subject. There is a very good book by Khotylevo, Anthropoaesthetics. I recommend it. It may seem a bit heavy because it is a scientific book with statistics and so on, but the conclusions are excellent. And you have essentially just voiced them. If we look at how men choose, who men consider attractive, both men and women, then in practice, yes, as you said, whatever exists is considered attractive. And women, when they evaluate both themselves and others, tend to think, it is fine as it is, but it could still be improved a little. The direction of change is rather arbitrary, honestly. It can go either way. That is classic Anthropoaesthetics. And know that this concerns physical appearance, the face, the nose, the eyes, the lips, proportions, and so on. There is always this idea that something could be adjusted slightly. For example, you are wearing makeup now, mascara, lipstick. You have slightly altered your appearance, the shape, the impression. Of course, your eyes and lips are the same, but the impression changes. I've not changed anything about myself. Well, they did powder me a bit just now. We have certain rules here, you know? Yeah, that is how it should be. But notice, it was women who did my makeup. Because mostly women will be watching. I honestly cannot recall ever seeing a male makeup artist. Maybe there are some. I am filmed every day and I am always made up by women. For men, it is usually just a quick fix so the forehead doesn't shine. That is it. Purely functional, so it looks fine on camera. But with women, there is always an attempt to create something. Straighten the hair, curl it, adjust something, and then you look and wonder what is going on. So yes, it works. And yes, such changes do exist, but it is not that evolution as a whole is driven entirely by women, because evolution is a complex process. Natural selection, for example, is something else. Who survives, leg length, all that. But when it comes to sexual selection and visual traits, women are the driving force. Because men did not select women very strictly. If a woman is alive, then everything is basically fine. She can have children, she has the necessary traits, but she invests a lot of energy into offspring. She supports herself and the child, effectively doing double the work. Good enough, we take her. If she has survived under that double load, that is already excellent. A man, on the other hand, only has to sustain himself, so he still has to prove that he's worth it. Anyone can survive on their own. It is not such a difficult task, especially within a group where people support each other. He has to demonstrate something extra. And so, women choose among men because the survival of a woman's genes depends on the man's genes. Offspring are half and half. From the woman's perspective, to ensure that her own genes continue to the next generation, the father must be ideal. And that is where the search for the ideal man begins. A woman can be almost any kind, but the man has to be ideal. And that is what drives sexual selection. Take note, everyone! You support the legislation of genetic engineering. There is a common fear that if it becomes legal, widely available and used on a large scale, people will inevitably begin enhancing themselves, ordering designer children with specific traits, and so on. Could this create a new form of genetic inequality, where some can afford enhancement and others cannot? That inequality already exists, genetic inequality. For example, I was born with poor eyesight. This is inequality. I want perfect vision. With glasses it is almost perfect, of course, but it would be better if it were natural. That is inequality. I am disadvantaged because of it. Others have normal vision, and I have minus whatever. Same applies in other ways. Everything else works more or less fine for me, but someone else might have crooked legs. Someone might be born without legs at all. That is inequality. Even if everything seems fine, arms and legs are there, some people can run fast, others cannot. Some have higher weight, some lower. Mine is lower, for example. There are advantages and disadvantages. I get cold more easily, while someone with more body fat does not. Since I am from Chita, that always bothered me. But I cope better in the heat, while someone weighing 100 kilos will overheat very quickly. So in some cases I have the advantage, in others I do not. Inequality is always there, even in terms of intelligence. So in that sense, we would actually level things out. Yeah, exactly. Genetic engineering could help level this out. For example, I'm very bad at foreign languages. No matter how much I study, I can read scientific articles in English, note, only scientific articles. But if it is poetry, I will not understand 90% of it. Fiction as well. Someone else cannot handle mathematics. I cannot either, by the way. Someone can draw well, someone is gifted in music, and someone is not. I am not. That is mental inequality too. I can talk about Australopithecines. Somewhere I was given that ability. Whether it is innate or the result of long study, but even to learn, you need some inborn potential. It seems to me that we would erase that innate potential and start designing children in advance. Now look, what we would create is strong genetic potential, but it still has to be realized during life. You cannot simply program knowledge about Australopithecines. Well, perhaps you could, but then it would be just a computer, a meaningless encyclopedia. If we want a normal human being, we give them potential. And then they still have to grow, learn, read books, communicate with others, do things with their hands, take part in excavations. Only then do they become a fully developed human being. Genetic engineering does not create a finished superhuman. Here you are, ready-made. They still have to work for it. That responsibility does not disappear. It seems that if we give someone an ability for languages in advance, it would… No, not a predisposition, but an ability. If they do not need languages, they simply will not use it. That potential will be applied elsewhere. They might go into law, architecture, make glass objects, anything. All right, I cannot argue with you. I agree. The reason I support genetic engineering is that we are changing the world around us much faster than we could biologically change through natural selection. Our generation length is about 25 years. But we consume resources and produce waste far more rapidly. And we cannot live on a landfill. Well, up to a point, maybe. But then we will not be able to. If the entire planet ends up covered in plastic waste to the horizon, and we are moving in that direction, we simply will not be able to live there. We are beings originally adapted to live in the African savanna. Later, not strictly African, but still a savanna environment. That is what we are adapted to. If we turn it into a plastic savanna, it becomes absurd. So we must change both ourselves and possibly the world around us. So far, we are mostly changing the world for the worse. That means we'll have to change ourselves. With a generation span of 25 years, it will take between 50,000 and 300,000 years for significant biological changes to occur naturally. That is simply what we see from evolutionary history. And there is no guarantee we will not go extinct. Neanderthals went extinct. You are saying that we are heading in the same direction towards extinction. Exactly. We will go extinct. But if we change ourselves, we have a chance not to. There are no guarantees. But at least we can try. That is the chance. If we do not try, we will die 100%. You said that Russians are genetically more similar to each other than to Tatars or Finno-Ugric peoples, but that in every Russian one can find traces of Tatars, Finno-Ugric peoples. It seems that this is exactly where our sense of national unity comes from. Do you agree? Of course. In fact, it is quite straightforward. Any population, any people has a core of origin. Somewhere along a particular river, they emerged, then multiplied, spread out, and moved in different directions. Some moved away, some stayed more or less in place. If the group is small, then they are most likely all related by definition. But if the population is large, like the Russians, around 80 million, then they will naturally form marriages with all sorts of people. So yes, among Russians, it is easily to find admixture from anyone. Evenks, Tatars, Chuvash, anyone. They intermarried with everyone. What is notable about the history of Russia is that there has never been segregation, strict restrictions or reservations. Not in chronicle times, not in the Tsarist period, not in the Soviet period. There was space for everyone. No one fundamentally prevented others from living alongside them. There were minor religious restrictions, but one could convert, and that resolved the issue. So overall, there was a high degree of openness. But statistics still apply. If there are 80 million Russians and, say, tens of thousands of another group, then Russians will tend to have a small share of that group's ancestry, while that smaller group will have a large share of Russian ancestry, simply because of the numbers. There are about 20,000 people in one group and 80 million in the other. The smaller group can merge into the Russians easily and naturally. It is not that anyone is destroying them, banning them, or oppressing them. It is simply how the numbers work. That is why they are preserved only when they remain isolated, living in hard-to-reach places where few people go. And the smaller the population, the stronger the effect of that mixture on it. That is how it works. And Russians, moreover, spread across this territory relatively recently, roughly over the past 1,000 years. In fact, settlement had already begun before the Christianization of Rus. So it is a bit more than 1,000 years, perhaps. They reached the Pacific Ocean in the 16th century. I do not recall the exact date, but around the 1600s, which is already the 17th century. And that was not so long ago. So even if we take 300, 400, 500 years, or even 1,000, that is not a very long time. If we count generations at 25 years, it is not enough for mixing to completely level everything out. So the peoples that existed 1,000 years ago still exist today. But if we look at the peoples that existed 2,000 years ago, they were already different. There was no word Russian. They were tribes, Krivichs, Radimichs, and the same applies to others. There were no Tatars either. There were other groups, Burtas and others. There were no Evenks as such either. Likely not even the term existed. There were clans, each with their own names. What exactly they called each other, we no longer know. But they had their own names. This span of about 1,000 years is simply the period in which we recognize something like the modern picture. But it is a dynamic system, and without any doubt, in another 1,000 years, everything will change again. People will say, there were once Russians, and now they have become something else, having merged, divided, and interacted with others. But the overall trend is consolidation. Fortunately, if Neanderthals lived in groups of 25 people, now we have 150 million people in one country. And again, there are no strict boundaries. In the minds of some individuals, yes, someone may decide they will not interact with others. But that is at the individual level. There will always be someone like that. In general, people can live wherever they wish. Here or there, it makes little difference. That is a good thing. But it is always worth remembering that there is also China, with 1.5 billion people. And they also live together quite successfully. They have around 65 or 66 officially recognized groups, something like that, and in reality more. So we still have something to learn from. There is also India, though India has many internal problems, so it is probably not the best example. But China has done well, and relatively recently reached its current level of stability. It was always large, but stable conditions came much later. So, yeah, we are doing well, but we are not perfect. There is still something to strive for, and that is a good thing. Because if we were perfect, we would become static and die out. That would be boring. Let's go back to the idea that culturally we are developing, but biologically we are already moving somewhere closer to the end. No, we are developing biological as well, just slowly. It's a gradual process. Before, it worked because we lived in Africa, where conditions changed slowly, and we had millions of years, hundreds of thousands of years, tens of thousands of years. Now we no longer have those tens of thousands of years. We no longer live like apes. We live in a civilization, and civilization is too active. That is exactly what I'm thinking about. This drive for progress, for technology, for knowledge, it feels like a beautiful story just before the door is slammed shut. Well, we should not let it be shut. That is exactly what I am against. That is why we need to change ourselves. In fact, I'm in favor of changing not only ourselves, but our entire civilization. Take something simple, a glass. It breaks, leaves shards. You can cut yourself. Why not make it organic? You drink your water, then eat the cup. Or plant it in the ground and a tree grows from it. It should be built into the ecosystem. Right now, our technologies are not integrated at all. This artificial material, it is probably made from oil. The table, everything around us right now is unnatural. It will take thousands of years to decompose. That is not nature. We need to make it part of an ecosystem. Imagine cameras that are alive. Wires that grow like ivy. You grow them, trim them, guide them, water them, fertilize them. Then civilization would become organic, balanced, and properly structured. Speaking of an organic civilization, not long ago you strongly criticized cryptocurrency mining, precisely because resources are being wasted thoughtlessly, for unclear purposes, when the same energy could, for example, send people to Alpha Centauri. I'm almost quoting you. What else, in your view, is humanity wasting resources on today, instead of doing something meaningful? Almost everything we do, to be honest, is trivial, though we should not go to extremes. I'm not saying we should become ascetics, live in boxes and devote everything to flying to Alpha Centauri. That would also be nonsense. Humans are living beings. Art, beauty, these things are also necessary. Humanity cannot exist without them. That has been true since the Cro-Magnons, at the very least. One does not exclude the other. But this kind of demonstratively pointless waste of resources, like with mining, that is what really bothers me. I think about how oil, gas, and similar resources are not infinite. They accumulated over 4 billion years, and we have spent them in just 200 years. Now we are consuming them even faster. And note how economic growth works. Each time it is growth relative to the previous level. 2% on top of that was already there. Then 2% on top of that, it is exponential growth, and that is alarming. Economists are happy, anthropologists are sad. And when all of this is spent on creating meaningless numbers, just so someone can feel good about the figures in their account, which they will never actually use because there are not enough material goods in existence to spend that money on, it becomes absurd. Future generations will condemn us for burning through what the planet accumulated over 4 billion years just to create numbers that disappear the moment the electricity is turned off. That is all they are. Gone instantly. You can throw a match into an oil field and watch it burn. At least it would produce heat. At least there would be some tangible result. But these numbers, this is the triumph of meaninglessness. And there is another problem. It is mentally harmful. People begin to think they can get something for nothing. They press a button, numbers appear. The electricity is often stolen, to be honest. Even if they paid for it, what do they actually do to earn that money? In reality, they receive material benefits created by the labor of others. That means they are taking the results of other people's work. That is wrong. I'm against that. And then a person says, I'm mining, and uses that money to buy real things, cars, bread, butter. That is our new world. It is a very unfair world. That is why I'm against it. Because if many people start striving for this, society will fall apart, and we will go extinct, like the Neanderthals, 100%. If no one produces cars, bread, butter, then there will be none. Everyone will have numbers stored somewhere, and eventually no one will even produce the devices to store them. You go to a shop, and there is no bread, only numbers. Here you can exchange bitcoins for bitcoins. It is absurd. If humans do go extinct, who in your view might replace us? You've mentioned raccoons, and I think someone else as well. Primates and raccoons. Why raccoons? Why not intelligent crows or dolphins? There are quite a few potential candidates, but dolphins do not have hands, so it is difficult for them to engage in labor. They have large brains, they are genuinely intelligent, but they have reached a kind of dead end. It is hard for them to develop further. They try to use their snouts, they pick up sponges, do something on the seabed, but it is all very limited. Crows have a similar problem. They have wings. You cannot do much with legs and a beak. And the main limitation is body mass. They cannot increase it significantly. They are already at their limit. It is actually remarkable that they are so intelligent with such small brains. At this size, their intelligence is a paradox. If we had that level of efficiency at our scale, we would be extraordinary geniuses. But we are not constrained by body mass in the same way, so we can afford to be less efficient. Raccoons are interesting because, in their basic characteristics, they resemble our ancestors, roughly at the level of 50–60 million years ago. If we emerged from such a starting point, there is no fundamental reason why raccoons could not. In principle, they could. But they developed under different environmental conditions, at a different time, and with certain differences in size. As a result, they have remained more or less the same for about 20 million years. If they were to find themselves in conditions similar to those of our ancestors, they could potentially undergo rapid evolutionary change. At the moment, it is difficult for them to evolve further also, because we already exist. We occupy the ecological niche of highly intelligent beings. It's hard to become a highly intelligent raccoon when humans dominate that niche. As long as they are amusing, people film videos of them stealing from rubbish bins. They are tolerated. But if they become truly intelligent and started to compete, they would simply be eliminated. I have no doubt about that. In fact, many of them are already killed regularly. We are extremely strong competitors. But if we were to disappear, they would be good candidates. And of course, other primates as well. Capuchins, chimpanzees, because they are the closest to us. If our ancestors evolved into us, there is no reason why other primates could not follow a similar path. Before we finish, I would like to return to Khotylevo. There is now a lot of discussion about creating a scientific and educational center directly on the excavation site. In your view, what should an ideal on-site museum look like to attract people from across the country, families, children? Well, in fact, we have already created it, and people are already coming. Scientific tourism has been running for about 4 or 5 years now. For now, it is still quite basic, very much grassroots. But we have a building and we have the excavation. The excavation is practically endless. There is a kilometer of riverbank, and each year we uncover about 3 meters. You can do the maths. That is enough for roughly 300 years, and that is only along the line. How deep it goes, no one really knows. This year we plan to excavate the medieval layer at the top. There is a medieval material there. Last year we found a dugout dwelling with a stove, a perfect one. We actually wanted to make a reconstruction for visitors, but when we started digging test pits, we uncovered the real one. We wanted a model and got the original, with a stove right in the center, exactly as it should be. So everything is already there. The only thing we really need, as usual, is funding. There are enough enthusiasts, enough archaeologists, enough people who know how to do this. What we lack is money. At the moment, we rely on scientific tourism, patrons and donations. Patrons give rarely but in large amounts. Donations come in small amounts from many people. And scientific tourism is our main support. It also gives direct feedback. People genuinely enjoy uncovering the past with their own hands. And strictly speaking, that is enough. At first, people are skeptical. What is scientific tourism? But once they find themselves at a real excavation and see how everything works, how it is organized, when they see 15 meters of layers, the Bryansk soil at the top, Cro-Magnons above, Neanderthals below, tools, animal remains, even mammoths lying there in full, they begin to understand. Nearby, about 2 kilometers from Khotylevo too, there is a Cro-Magnon ritual complex with mammoth tusks and many other finds. There are also medieval dwellings and kilns. And when people see how archaeological layers are formed and preserved, not only cultural layers, when they see that we even have wooden remains dating back 60,000 years, preserved without permafrost, which is a discovery of global significance, they become truly engaged. That is why many visitors come back, 3, 4, even 5 times. It really draws you in. And later they take part in our activities in Moscow. Many of them become involved themselves. That is the key point. It is not just a museum where you come, look and leave. We are building a museum too, of course, but the main thing is participation. Because creativity and any meaningful activity require effort. A person has to do it themselves. With their hands, their eyes, and most importantly, their mind. To dig with a shovel, to sweat a little, at least for a day to get started. Better for a week or 2. I spend a month there, myself. Some colleagues stay for 2 months. I'm limited by teaching practice, but in principle, anyone can come for longer. We are planning to introduce 10-day programs for convenience. There are also excursions. The key idea is that a person becomes not just a visitor, but a participant, and then people stay involved. Those who first came just to see what it was like, later become lecturers, for example, giving talks in our center in Moscow. They film videos, help create exhibits for the future museum, take part in all kinds of activities. Artists are involved as well. Pavel Krasnov in St. Petersburg, for instance, prints 3D models of skulls. The originals are kept in places like Kenya. We will never get them, but models can be printed. There is a huge amount of work, making storage boxes, labels, notebooks, merchandise, even t-shirts with mammoths. I drew the mammoths myself, by the way. All of this is activity. And when many people are involved, this is exactly what makes us sapiens. This is what once gave Cro-Magnons an advantage over Neanderthals, society. That is the guarantee of the future. It matters for children as well. We always encourage people to come with children. They see how constructive, creative, and meaningful this work is, and they will repeat it in the future. Children copy what they see, and that is how a positive, creative, and constructive future is formed. And a final question for our viewers: let us recommend something. A book by Stanislav Drobyshevsky, or perhaps a book or a film that you find most realistic about our future. If we're talking about science fiction about the future, then I like the books of the Strugatsky brothers and Stanislav Lem the most. There are many of them. I honestly do not remember all the titles. I mostly read them a long time ago, when I was still at school or university. I have reread some, but not that many. But Lem and the Strugatskys, they are ahead of everyone. For example, the Strugatsky cycle about the Noon universe. That is the most optimistic one. Their later works became much darker, more depressive. The situation in the country was changing, and it affected them immediately. Especially later, when only one of them remained, everything became rather bleak. But there is a middle period. Early works are too idealized, later ones are too dark, but the middle is exactly right. That is their creative peak. That is where everything comes together. And Lem, he is more playful, more ironic. The Siberiad, the robot tales, pilot perks, there is a lot of humor there. That is essential reading. Thank you very much for this fascinating conversation. Thank you. There are many unique places in our country. Entire ravines filled with history. And when people see this and understand how it all works, what an archaeological layer looks like, they become engaged and become part of the process. By studying those who lived before us, we begin to understand something very important about ourselves.